So I'm just going to be taking you through a series of websites and showing you how I would do searches. And the first website I want to show you is this one here. Most of you probably know about this one already, but it's particularly good if you want to find a birth, marriage, or death certificate for Northern Ireland or Ulster or any part of Ireland up until around 1921 for the north of Ireland. But if you're looking for the south of Ireland, then you can get more recent records as well here. So when you go on to this website, you just go to the Civil Records tab, and you can then put in information to search for whatever record you want to look for. So I could look, for example, for Martha Phillips, and I could look for a marriage for Martha Phillips. So I'm just putting in the name Martha Phillips. I don't know when she married, so I'll just say 1850 to 1900. So I'm doing a very wide search, and I'm only going to look for marriages, and I could do a search. So this is one of my ancestors. I then have to just fill out this little box, and it's going to ask me to put in my name. Sometimes I put in my name, sometimes I just put in letters just to get through this little section 61. And there is the certificate of my ancestor's marriage. So this is who she married. This is Martha Phillips, my 3 times great grandmother, and she married Andrew Bowles. That was her first husband before she married my 3 times great grandfather. So if I click on this, you probably all know this, you can then see the image, and you can bring up the actual record that will show you what you've got here. So I can now see the original record, which is telling me now it is a transcription of the record. It's not the actual original record, but all the information should be the same. If you do find something that looks wrong, you may want to look at the original church record just to be sure. But I can see now that they married in the parish church of Macrahamlet, and Andrew Bowles was 30, and he was called a dealer, and he lived in Drumgavelin. That is a townland outside Ballynahinch, and he married Martha Ann Phillips, who was 22. And this is just showing me that the witnesses were John Phillips and Margaret Jane Barr. Now, it's very interesting and very important to take a note of people who are the witnesses. And again, if it's a death or a birth you're looking for, look for the name of the person who's registering that event, because that is particularly useful because they are usually, or quite often, family members. In this case, you could have a pretty good clue that John Phillips is somehow related to Martha. And in fact, he is. He is a brother. I have found that out in subsequent occasions. But that was a very good clue for me. And bear in mind, this is an 1850 record, so it's an early record. And to be able to establish that Martha is the brother of John is very useful. The other interesting fact is that Margaret Jane Barr is also a witness. I have now subsequently found out that Martha Jane Barr was Martha's cousin. And I found that out through a DNA match. So that was very useful. But again, if you don't take a note of these names as you go along, then you don't realize the relevance if you find that information on another record as you go further forward. But what I want you to look at here is James Phillips, farmer. So this has taken me back to my 4 times great grandfather, and now I have his name. And I know that he probably lived in Drumgavelin in this townland in Macrahamlet outside Ballynahinch. So that's the first thing I'm getting from that. So that is what I would be doing for the early records. But as I said, once you get to 1921, you don't have this source of records anymore. So you have to look for something else. And what I would suggest you do is go to Groney. And this is Groney Online, which is run by NI Direct. And basically what you have to do is log into this site. And when you log in, it allows you then to do a search for a birth or marriage or a death. Now, you have to put credits onto your account to make the search facility work correctly. But once you do that, you can use the indexes for free. So if I wanted to look up that original record, I could do so. So if I had a slight doubt that maybe there was something wrong on the version that I got on the previous site, I could look it up again here. But I would have to pay £2.50 in order to see the original record. But I can use the indexes for free. And what I could maybe look up here is a death. So I'm going to look up a death now, and I'm going to look up for my great-grandmother. And she was Elizabeth McVeigh, and she was born in 1877 and she died in 1937. So when she died, she was obviously married to my great-grandfather, and her surname was McDowell. So I'm going to do a search for someone who's called McDowell, because I have to search under the name she had at the time. And she was Elizabeth or Eliza. So I'm just going to do a search for Eliza. And I'm just going to look for the 1 year, 1937, because I know that's when she died. And I press search. And this allows me to find there's one record in Groney that fulfills that search. And when I do, I find there is one record. Now, that's not her. She didn't die in Coleraine, and she wasn't 79. So I know that's not her. And that's because I searched for Eliza. And you have to think sometimes outside of the box and think, you may have known her as Eliza, but she may not have used that name on her death certificate. She may not have been registered for that. So what I could do is try Elizabeth or Lizzie or some other spelling. But I can also on this site do a begins with. That's what I want to show you. When I do a begins with Eliza, then that allows for other spellings to come in here. So if somebody had misspelt this as Elizabeth, B-I-T-H, say, instead of B-E-T-H, it would still come up when I do a begins with search. So when I just press search again, I don't get 1 this time, I get 8. And this allows me to see 8 different certificates that are coming up for that year. And you can see that in this case, they are all correctly spelled as Elizabeth. Now, I know that she died on the 7th of May, and there's the record there. So she was 59 when she died, and I found that from her burial record. So if I want to see the certificate, then I can click on this here. I would probably encourage you not to click on the enhanced. The enhanced only costs you 1 credit, but you get so little identifying additional information that it's nearly a waste of a credit. So I would normally prefer to only look up records I really want, and then to click on full. And when I do that, it then loads up here and it says I can now view that record for 5 credits. Now, I don't want to do that, obviously, because I have this one already, but I just wanted to show you how I could get this. Once you click on that, it then deducts 5 credits from your account, and that's the equivalent of £2.50 to view it. Now, you can't download these certificates at all, but yeah, you just have to be careful about that. You really should be writing the information down. But I know that what some people do is screenshots. I obviously wouldn't encourage you to do that because it's breaking the code of what Groney requests you to do. But I do know that that is what some people would do in that situation. So that is what I would use then, is Groney. And Groney is a very good source of information. Now, you can get Groney information that will give you births up to 100 years ago. It gives you marriages up to 75 years ago and deaths up to 50 years ago. And that's what you can get at the moment when you're accessing this website from home. And it's updated every month. So it means that every month a new month's worth of records are uploaded onto the site, so as you can see those. But if you want to see more recent records, you can still access them through this website, but you have to do them in person in Groney or in person at the Public Records Office in Belfast. You have to be in one of those 2 buildings, and basically what you have to do is set up an account before you go, and you just remember your password and you bring it in with you. And when you access it from the terminals in those two buildings, you can then see records up until yesterday. And that's extremely useful because not all of us can get back to those free records. So you may have to purchase a couple of records just to make sure that you're on the right track and that you want to verify a particular line or person that you've been researching. So that's Groney. So always remember, you need to go onto that site, you have to create an account, and you have to have at least one credit in your account in order to make it all work. And you can see at the moment, I have 5 credits. So you can buy up to 200 at a time, and they can be stored in your online account on Groney. Now, so that's how I would get a certificate. I would either use the free ones or I would do it on Groney this way. But the other thing you can do is you can then use a website called Roots Ireland. And what Roots Ireland allows you to do is to access the same information. So it's not a new record source, but what they have on this site, it's a pay-per-view site. I like it because it allows you to do searches, and you can search the records in a variety of ways that you can't do on either Groney or Irish genealogy. So if I'm looking, say, for example, for a marriage, if we go back to the example of Martha Phillips, as I said, that is my 3 times great grandmother, and I know her father's name from that certificate I just looked up, and it's James, and he was a farmer, and he lived in Drumgavelin. So what I'm going to do here is just show you how I would use this. There's many different ways to use this site, but I have a particular like of this particular method here. And what I like about this site is that you can search by father's name. So now that I have established that Martha had a father called James, I can do searches for people who were called Phillips that had a father called James. And what I know about this family is that James had 12 children. I've already established that through a baptism. Martha was the first of his 12 children, and I found only one baptism for the family, and that was the 12th child, and they were noted as the 12th child. So that told me that I needed to find 10 other siblings for Martha. Now, you can restrict it by county, and I find that this family, sometimes they moved to Belfast, sometimes they stayed around Ballynahinch, which is in County Down. So I'm just going to restrict this search to those 2 counties. And I'm looking for anyone who married, who had a father called James. And when I do a search, I get all of these different options. Now there's Martha's record. And when I look at it on this site, I see it looks slightly different. I haven't quite got this right. It's Drumgavelin. They have it recorded as Drumgarland. So I wouldn't always take this site as the most accurate, but it works well for searches. So if you find a record here, you might want to go back to the first site I showed you and just check the wording for yourself to make sure that you think it's reliable. So that is that record I found. But there's another one here. There's a James Phillips. Now he lived in Nelson Street in Belfast, and as far as I'm aware, that is not a member of the family. But I can now just click through all of these different records and see what I find. There's another one I don't think's right because James Phillips was a gardener in this instance. So I'm having a look just to see what I can find, going back and forth, and there I have now found one for John Phillips, again, Belfast. No, that's not right. So I'll go on to this one for Elizabeth, and suddenly I've got an Elizabeth married a William Turner. No, that's not right either. There's another Elizabeth. Let's try her. And there I've now found one. Drumgavelin and Macra Hamlet. The same townland. I have an age for her as well. And I know that she married Henry C. Scott. And her father was James, a farmer. So there's a very good chance that Elizabeth was, in reality, Martha's sister. I then have another clue down here. I have William Phillips and I have James Cleland. It turns out that James Cleland is actually another cousin of Elizabeth, and that William is actually Elizabeth's brother. So now I've got another name. So the witnesses' name are taking me that little bit further. and I can calculate an approximate date of birth given by the age on this certificate as well. So that would make her born around 1834. So I'm now starting to get a little picture of what this family is like. I can go to the next page and I can see if there's any other ones that I want to look at. There's a John Phillips. The reason I'm looking for John is because there was a John as a witness. There may be a William, and there's a William. And William lived in Ballynahinch, which is very close. He was a shopkeeper. His father was James, and he was a farmer. And that actually is part of this family. So again, it's trial and error. It's just looking at these certificates and seeing what you can find. Look for Macrahamlet in this instance, look for Drumgavelin, and just see what you can find. And I find this method works very well. So it's the methodology of how you use this site. It's not really the records on it as much. But you can then go and find baptisms on this site too that you wouldn't get on the other sites that I've just shown you. So there is additional information here, but I just wanted to show you Roots Ireland because of that unique search they have by father's name. And I find that very useful. You can also do a father's name and a mother's name search on a birth certificate as well. So that's just showing you what you can get on Roots Ireland. So next we have started to build up a picture here. And what we have got Martha, and we have been going through this site and we've been trying to pick out all of the siblings of Martha Phillips. So all of the children of James. And I know that James's mother, the mother of Martha, who was James's wife, I've got her name, which is Mary Cleland. And I managed to get that from the one baptism I found that I referred to earlier. So what I've found now is I've found almost all of these marriages, but I haven't found one. I did find a reference on one of these marriages to a witness who was called James Phillips Jr. And as you know, Martha's father was James Phillips. So when I found James Phillips Jr., I presumed that that had to be the son of James the farmer. But I couldn't find a marriage for that James, and I was missing one person. So when I'm missing a person, what I tend to do is look outside of Northern Ireland just in case somebody in the family had emigrated. And what I would do is go into Family Search. And Family Search is another great site where you can get free access records and you can get them for all around the world. Now, tonight, I'm talking about Northern Irish records, and I'm specifically honing in on them. But what I can do on Family Search, I just go to this little search button on Family Search. Again, you have to register to go into this account. And the really interesting thing about Family Search is you can search certificates around the world by parents' names. And again, I find that a very useful way of finding strays that you can't find in Northern Ireland. So in this instance, I'm going to continue with the same example. I'm putting in the father's name as James Phillips. And because I found that one baptism I referred to, I know the mother was Mary Ann Cleland. So I am just putting that information in, and I'm not putting in the name of any person or a place or a country. I'm just putting in those two random names, and I'm looking for any record that has these two people as their parents. Now, obviously, if the names that you have are extremely common, this wouldn't help you. But in this instance, there's probably not that many James Phillips who married a Mary Ann Cleland. So it's worth searching for. And if you do this for your direct ancestors, you may be lucky enough to find a record that you hadn't previously found. So when I do a search, this is what I get. The first record is for a James Phillips, who's the groom in a marriage in Ontario. His parents are listed at time of marriage as James Phillips and Mary Ann Cleland. His birth was 1845, and as you saw earlier, his sisters were born in the 1830s. So this is entirely credible. But what I would want is some additional information. For example, I would want to know that this James was born in Ireland, because if he wasn't born in Ireland, it could be another couple that just happened to marry that had the same names. The really interesting thing about this is that there's a little camera symbol. And when you find that on Family Search, it means that you can view the original image on which this index is based. So when I click on that, it allows me to bring up the actual certificate. And this is just what I'm doing now. This is coming from the Archives of Ontario. So I can do a little zoom in here to find the record and just bring it down to show you it here. So there it is there. So James Phillips was 29. His residence when married was Toronto. His place of birth was Ireland. I found him. He was a bachelor. He was a farrier, and that's his parents. He gave those names as his parents, and that's the couple that I know that lived in Drumgavelin outside of Ballynahinch. Now, there's no record of Ballynahinch here, but the parents' names are so specific, they're identifying him. And don't forget, I already have a certificate that says that there was a James Phillips Jr. who attended one of his sister's marriages. And this was obviously before this date, before he emigrated to Canada. There's the details of who he married. And again, I've got the date and place of marriage and the religion as well, and witnesses. So you've got all of that information coming in there. So that's extremely useful source. So definitely also look at Family Search if you want to look for strays who have come from outside of Northern Ireland. So just going to move on now, and I'm going to look at the next record that I want to show you, and this is PRONI. So what I want to take you to now is PRONI. PRONI is the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. They have an excellent website with a lot of different search engines on it. The one I want to show you now is wills. And what you can do on the PRONI site is look for wills, because any will that was made from that was proved from 1858 on survives. And those wills are in existence. Well, the information from the wills are in existence either in a copybook, or after about 1900, the actual wills survive as well. And you can search for those. Some of the early ones have been scanned on from the copybooks, and they're available to look at on this website. So in this example, I'm going to look for an Oliver Brown. And Oliver Brown was, again, another one of my ancestors. So when I look for Oliver Brown, again, if you're going to have an ancestor called Brown, it's probably quite a good Christian name to have for your ancestor, because there's not too many of them. And I find there's only 2 Oliver Browns who left wills, and one of them died in 1877 and one died in 1925. Now, this is telling me a little bit more about them, so I can click on this, and this looks the right one to me, because I know he lived in Drumsill. Now, that's not the right spelling of Drumsill, but obviously that's what they used at the time. Again, James Brown of Mullaghcarton, that's an E where it should actually be a C. So some of the actual townlands in this search are not correct, but you can still find valuable information. And this is why, if you put in an awful lot of information in that search, you may not find the record that you're looking for, because Drumsill would normally be spelled Drumcill, but in this case it's Shill. And as I said, Mullaghcarton is also spelled incorrectly. But what I can do now is I can then look at over here where it says image. And when I click on image, it brings me into the actual document. You can see there's 2 pages here. And this is 2 pages of the copybook that have been scanned on, because this original record no longer exists. And when I scroll down, I can see it here. So there's the beginning of Oliver Brown's will. Now, you do have to develop a little skill in being able to read this writing, and sometimes that can be harder than what you think. I, Oliver Brown, of the townland of Drumsill and parish of Macragall, farmer, being weak in body but sound in mind, do make this my last will and testament. I bequeath to my son, Andrew Brown, my house and lands and all my chattel properly. So it goes on there. If I go to the second page, you can see he mentions his wife Betty. And even just by looking through this, you can see his niece, Easter Brown, which is actually Esther. And he has his son, James, there. So you're starting to get up a picture. He mentions down here his sister, Sarah Downey. So there's a lot of information. He was about 82 when he died, and it's mentioning his sister to me. Now, that sister has remained elusive. So if anyone can find out which Sarah Downey this is for me, I'd be very grateful to hear that. But it's a person I haven't been able to pin down yet. But there is additional information in that is particularly useful. And you can see how that helped me with my family tree when I came across that particular will. So that's the Prony wills. But it's not only Prony that have wills, because wills, as I said, only exist in a certain format from 1858 on. But there is indexes to earlier wills that also exist, and you have to look for them on a different site. And what you have to do is go to the census site. I'm sure I haven't shown you this so far, but probably a lot of you are familiar with searching the census site on the National Archives of Ireland, and you can look for the 1901 or the 1911 census. But there's a little secret button, as I call it, and it's something that a lot of people don't notice. When you click on this here, genealogy, this little innocuous word on the search box, this brings you to a mine of additional information on this website, and it's very easily overlooked. And you've got all these other options down here, and one of the options is pre-1858 wills. So if there is a record of a will, you will find it on this site. And that's what I'm going to show you now. So when we click on this, it brings us into an explanation of what can be found there. And then I have got a search facility. Now, when I look for this, I can search under a surname or a Christian name or a townland or whatever. But bear in mind, when you do that, the actual place name or the surname may be spelled differently. So do search under different spellings. Just exactly as I showed you on the Prony site, the spellings aren't always the spellings that we would expect. So in this instance, I'm doing a search for McKinney. And I'm going to do a George McKinney. So I'm looking for the will of a George McKinney because I suspect he died before 1858. And what I found here is somebody who died in 1854, somebody who died in 1759, and then there's another couple of records for the same person here in Carrickfergus in 1854. So what I'm trying to show you here is there's 3 different records for this one person, and they're all going to tell me something slightly different. Now, I can establish that this person lived until at least 1850. So I can rule out that one. In this instance, I know that's not correct. So I'm just going to click on these 3 to show you what I find. So when I click on this first one, I get 4 different documents. So we'll come back to that one in a minute. We'll look at this other one here. I've got 1 document. So what I've got here is I've got a list just that this will existed. And if I make this slightly bigger, you'll be able to read it. So what it shows you here is McKinney. Here's all the McKinneys who died in that time period. And there's George, Carrickfergus, 1854. That doesn't mean he died in 1854. It shows his will went to probate in 1854. But at least that could give me an approximate date of death for that particular individual person. So even that is useful because it can help you to find people of a name that died in a particular place. And there's Carmony, which is probably Carnmoney. That's just misspelled again. So that's that one. When I go back, I can now look at this other one, and it tells me something slightly different. There's 1 page here again, but look what I get this time. It's a totally different page. Again, zoom in and look for what you're looking for. And what I'm looking for is the name of the deceased, and it's going to be somewhere down this column here. So I'm looking for McKinney, and there he is, George McKenna. So I'm just making this slightly bigger for you so as you can read it. And what we're finding here is that George McKenna, he left £56 and he was from Carrickfergus. He left a will, and when I move over here, it's telling me additional information. It's telling me that James McKenna was his, I think that says executor, an executor. And it's telling me the date when it went to probate. It's telling me that it was August the 11th, and again, that's 1854. So that's giving me additional information there that I didn't have before. But if you look at some of these ones up here, the information you can get, there's James McCulloch from Belfast. It's telling me that his widow was Sarah. Now that could be crucial information if you're building your family tree. Look at this one here, Hugh Wilson. His cousin was William Smith. Now that's not even the same surname. So that again could maybe help you with a DNA match, or it could help you in a really specific way to build this family tree. There is a William McRoberts from, that's Ballygowan in Relu, and Samuel McWilliams, John and Matthew McRoberts. Again, there's McRoberts who are the executors of that particular person. So there's all of these names. There's a grandson. James Hayes was the grandson of, I think that's Samuel MacDonald, or maybe Alexander MacDonald. We need to look at that a bit closer. But you can see again how that is an incredibly useful document. And all of these names can be looked up on that will document, on that search facility. So that's these two we've looked at, but we've still got that first one that had 4 pages that I'm going to take you back to now. And when we look at this, because it is in a more recent time period, it's recorded in 1854, it's telling me that the will was made in 1849. So this man maybe didn't die until 1853 or 1854, but he made his will a few years earlier. And when I click on this, look what I get. I actually get the wording of the will, because some of these do exist. And when I zoom in closer, you can see that there's a series of wills on this particular document. So there's a will for an Isabella McAdam of Joy Street in Belfast. I have her will there, but the reason it came up on this search is because this is the will that started here. The will of George McKenna of North East Division of Carrickfergus. And I start to get the actual wording of his will. If I go over here a little bit, I can see the information. Sorry, I'm just moving things about on my screen here so as I can see this carefully. I actually get a date of death as well for him. If I zoom in, you may be able to see that okay. Sorry, I'm just moving things about here. He died on the 28th of October, 1849. And there is all of the wording of his will. And there's lots there. So that's 2 pages. If I click on this, I will get even more of his will. Look how much there is. Go to page 3. There's even more. And when I go to page 4, I start to find codicils to his will as well. So he wasn't just happy with making his will, he actually made codicils to the will as well. So they were changes. So you can see you can get some recent information there. Now, the only ones you will find that type of information for are records for County Antrim and County Down that were in the 1850s, just before that cut-off period in 1858. But do search for them because you may find them. And the little clue is you'll see the word prerogative court beside it, and you'll have a year for the will beside it. So that's a little clue to tell you that there's more information. But you can see there was 3 records for that one particular will. If you find even the one with the most basic information, it's still useful. But the second one gives you more, and the third one gives you everything you could possibly want on this particular individual. So that is very useful. Now, the other thing I just want to show you now is there is also another set of records on family search. And I'm just going to get this up for you now. This is a link that I need to make a copy of. If I just cut this link in for you, and this link will be in the handout that's available, it takes you through to Family Search again. And what this is this is an 1818 will book that I found recently that has been extremely useful to us in some of our research. Now, the entire book is on here. As far as I know, it's not properly indexed yet, but when you look at this, it gives you wills from 1818 to 1820 for the Diocese of Connor. And it gives you a few hundred wills. Now, this book was damaged, it says there, in 1922. And what that means is it was partially burnt in the forecourts. And what somebody's done is they have copied out what survives of this book. And the writing isn't actually too bad to read, but they put in little dots. If I make that closer, you might just see those little dots. And you can see here that of God, amen. I, Thomas, and that's probably a surname there, in the county of Antrim, And you can just see, there's all the information is lost there, but there's a lot of information is surviving. So the really interesting thing there, again, my deceased brother, and again, the name is missing. It's just unfortunate sometimes that the information that you want is missing. But what it is telling you is he did have a brother, and his brother had died before him. So even that's useful. There's his nephew, Thomas Battersby, is mentioned. So all of that can be very useful if you plow through that information. But you can see there that I've landed on page 441 of this microfilm reel that's on Family Search. When I go to the next page, it takes me to page 442. I can go right to page 683, looking through all of these individual wills, and you may just get something extremely useful. So if you've got a spare half an hour and you want to have a little look back at wills that were produced in 1818, you may just find something of use. And again, these are records that are relevant to Northern Ireland. Again, there's one in Gracehill in Ballymena. But just skip on a couple of pages here, just randomly what I find here. Just go to the next one, see what we get. There's one that's Belfast. This one here is a James Reed of Killycowan. I'm not even sure exactly where Killycowan is. It may be in Fermanagh, just thinking. Though I may be wrong on that. So again, you can see quite a lot of information in this, so it's worth going through them. The next one there is the will of William Dinsmore of Ballymoney. So again, if that was your family, that would be a really good find for you. So that is the old Connor will book of 1818 to 1820. So what we're just going to do now is go back to where we were on that census site, and I'm bringing you into this button again for genealogy that I showed you earlier. And this time we're going to be looking at a different way to find the 1851 census that no longer survives. And what happened in Ireland was about 1909, when the old age pension was introduced, they had to verify somebody's age in order to see if they qualified for the pension. Now, you could produce any evidence that you wish to. You may have given maybe a baptism from a church that verified your age. But what you could also do was request a lookup in the 1851 census. Because if you could be found there as a child, it verified your age, and it also qualified you for the old age pension. So this is what you find in 1909. A lot of people submitted search forms for the 1851 census to the government, and they were able, it explains it all here to you, and you can search these forms. Now, there's some additional forms on Ancestry that you don't get on this site. So this isn't all of the old age pension applications, but you may just get something very useful here. And again, one that I found was one for an Eliza Close, who is my 2 times great grandmother. I found there that she lived in 110 Earl Street. Now, she was born in the 1840s, and it's telling me here that her parents were John Close and Eliza Carner, and they lived in Ballycarry. when I click on her name, I can see the original form that this is relevant to. So there's some more information, and then I can click on image. When I bring this up, there's the form. And what it's telling me is that John and Eliza Close were her parents. But somebody has put this in brackets. Now, what has actually happened here is another mistake has been made. And this isn't Carner, although it looks like Carner. That is Camer, C-A-M-E-R. And the surname of Eliza was actually Cameron. So whatever way it's been said, it's been written down as Camer, and the O-N were not written on this particular document. But that helped me to find the baptisms and the actual record for this family because I had that information. When I look down, I get the name of all of our brothers and sisters on this. And then there is some notes that were taken about the actual search that was conducted on the 1851 census. So that again is another way of getting information that you may not know exists. And those old age pension records are very easily searched on this particular site here. Again, if you just go back, you can put in the surname of the applicant, but do bear in mind, this might be the married name of the applicant. You can also search under the father and the mother here as well, and also by residence. So again, another very good source record. So next we're going to look at church records. So once you've looked at all the certificates and the wills, you may want to go slightly further back. And the only way you can do that is by going into looking at church records. And a very good way of seeing what's available for church records is just doing a Google search for Prony church records. And again, a lot of the church records are kept at the Public Record Office. And you can see here that it's coming up with a guide, but I'm just going to go into Google and show you how to find that. So there it is there. It's coming up on NI Direct, which is the government site, and it's a guide to church records. And when I click on this, it allows me to read about what Prony have. So they have a large guide, which gives you the list of all of the church records which they maintain. And this is the abbreviations for all the different denominations. They also have a list here of all of the copies that they have provided digitally. And that means when you go into Prony, you can look them up as a digital image, which means you don't have to go through the microfilm reels. The advantage of these is they are clearer to read and easier to use and more accessible. So you can then click on this particular document and it will open up this big book for you. You can even download that onto your computer and you will have that available for you. And that will tell you what survives and where it's held. So Prony have all of their records on there. They also have some records that are described as being in local custody. And when you look at something in local custody, that means that it's held by the church. So you've got an index here. And then if you just look through, there's the microfilm reels. Again, if it's under a different name, that's all fully available on the index. They've listed some of their digital records there as well. And there's one that says in local custody. So that's another good way of finding what records exist. But you're here today at a talk by the North of Ireland Family History Society, and we have a lot of church records transcribed. And when you go to our website, you're able to access this information. And if you're a member, you can request this through our lookup service. So if you go to our resources tab and look at church records, what you can find here is a list of many of the churches that we have transcribed. Now, this is not fully up to date because some of the more recent transcriptions that we've done in our society are not yet on this list. But you can go through this and you can see what churches we have, the baptisms that exist, the marriages that exist, and the burials that may exist. And then you get a reference number. And that's the reference number you have to quote on your lookup if you want to request a record from that particular record set. And you can go through the various counties and whatever. And some of them have got a list of surnames recorded as well. So those green links are clickable. So that's how you would find the list of church records that is held by our society. But we also have more records. There's lots more here to look through. And one of them I'll just show you very quickly is graveyard records. So again, this is a list of all of the records that we hold. And again, the shelf number. A lot of these transcriptions may be in books that we hold. They may be available in our shop. And some of them are transcriptions that our members have done. So they're unique to us as well. So they're all listed there for you. So again, do look at that and see if there's anything relevant to your family history search. Okay, moving on then, the next site I'm going to show you is Ask About Ireland. And this is a site that you can use to explore the Griffiths valuation and land records. So when you just do a search for Ask About Ireland, it brings you up the Griffiths valuation. And that's what I'm going to show you here. And what you can do is find a couple of things on this that may be of use to you. I'm going to just show you very briefly. Again, we're going back to the example of James Phillips, who was started with. James Phillips, I'm just going to put in his name here. So I'm putting in James and Phillips. And I'm just going to say what county he lived in. Now, as we know, it's Drumgavelin and Macrahamlet, but I'm just going to search for County Down and just see what it brings me up. And then do a search. And I'll get a list of all the James Phillips that are relevant. And look, there's Macrahamlet. So the Griffiths valuation was done between 1847 and 1864. So this has taken me back beyond the civil registration of births and deaths, and it's taken me into that earlier period. So there's some information I can get on James here. And what I'm going to do first is just look at the original page, because that gives me a list of all the people who lived in Macrahamlet, and it will allow me to check that he was actually in Drumgavelin at that particular time period. So when I search, I get a page, and I can just zoom in again to make this bigger. So there's Drumgavelin. And if I just look down for his name, then I'll be able to see what property he lived in. So I'm just bringing that up there, and there is John Bowles, who Martha married, and this is James Phillips. So he was in property 18. It's telling me who his landlord was, and it says he had house, offices, and land. Now, on this description, it doesn't mean they were all really rich and owned all these modern offices. They're actually barns. It's a farmland, and offices in this instance means an outbuilding or a barn. And this is the number of acres that he had. So he had 22 acres, 2 roods, and 25 perches of land. And that is just shown at the top. You can just see there that it gives you that information. Probably at the top of the screen, it says area. And this is acres, roods, and perches. And this is the value of his property here. So I now know that he was living in, if I go back down again, he was living in Drumgavelin, and he was living in property 18. So just remember that for a minute. So we're going to take this a little further. We can also look at his neighbours. You may remember from one of those early wills, there was a Martha Jane Barr that I said was a relative. Well, look, next door to him in property 19 is William Barr Jr. There was also a Tate mentioned on one of these wills as well. Sorry, in one of the certificates. And there's another Barr, and there's a Bowles. So all of these people are interconnected, and they're all living pretty close to each other. There's another couple of Barrs up there. So this has given me additional people that I can look at and maybe connect to him somehow, because I know that he is connected to the Barr family. So there's 2 up there, 1 there, and 1 there. And I might be able to find that they're all related to each other. I have found that Andrew Barr was his brother-in-law. So again, this is helping me to get slightly further in my search. So going back to this, I got that from the original page. So what I'm going to do now is look at a map of this particular property. And I do it by clicking on this map view. So I'm just going to click this little button here. And what this does is opens up a map of the area, which was made at the time of Griffiths valuation. And that's between 1847 and 1864. Now it's saying up here, preparing your map. This should just take a moment. And this is the type of thing that you have to wait for when you're doing a live presentation. So we'll just tell you what is coming up. Oh, there we are. So what this is going to allow me to do now is it's showing me which map I should be looking at, and it's allowing me to zoom in here. So I'm just going to zoom in and look for Drumgavelin. And as far as I know, Drumgavelin is down here. There it is. And you can see here that the borders are put around these little townlands. And there's Drumgavelin, Drumgavelin. And I found on the previous sheet that James was living in property 18. So what I can see now is there is property 18. That's his 22 acres. And I can see exactly where his house was. So he had a little lane. So this is the road going up through Drumgavelin. And this is how all the properties are connected. And then there's a little line going up here to a small house there. And there also seems to be another house down there as well. There's a little inn. And if you look at the original page, you can see that he sublet a house. And this is probably a tenant's house. And this lane led up to his. So I can see what the land looked like at that time when this map was constructed. But there's also an additional feature on this site. As well as looking around, I can see that Macra Hamlet National School was only a few fields away. So that's somewhere probably where his children went. There's another one mentioned, Hillside Cottage. So that must have been a notable place at the time. There's a church and a graveyard. Macaulay's Lake. But if I now do this little toggle, what I can do is move this, and I can toggle this between the historical map, which is what I'm looking at, and the modern day map. And this would help me establish where this property is today if I wanted to visit it. So if I go right up to the modern map, I can see the actual roads that are here at the moment. I hope you can see that clearly. So this is the property that I'm looking at here. And there's a road here. There's the Ballymacarn Road. And it's telling me then which roads are in existence. So I can see that that's probably farmland today. I can then do it maybe halfway. And this allows me to see the road as it is today, but also to see the old map as well. And you can see there, the Ballymacarn Road is still in existence today. So if I establish that I can find that, then I'll be able to find this particular road and find where James lived all those years ago. And you can do this for any part of Ireland by using this particular website. So we're very near the end now. So I'm just going to show you one more site. And this is again for looking for something that, again, if you're looking for a stray or someone who's went away, one site that I would use is Scotland's People, because there was a big link between the north of Ireland and Scotland. And when you look at this, you can go in and you can log into your site. Again, if you log in here, what you can find is you can do searches and you can look for individual people. So again, I could look for James Phillips. Now, I know he didn't go to Scotland, but I'm just doing a search. I can look for old civil parish records as well. I'll just do a search randomly here for 1850 to 1900. And when I do a search, then it will bring me up births, marriages, and deaths. You can see how many there is here. So say, for example, I was looking for the death of James Phillips. I'd be clicking on deaths. And now I've got 122 different records. And what's really useful about this is it's giving me middle names, it's giving me ages, and it's also giving me his mother's maiden name. So if I was looking for someone in particular, I could maybe identify who they were by their mother's maiden name, if I already knew that, by a combination of their age and the mother's maiden name. And that may help me to identify someone. The real beauty of these records is that if you buy a death or a marriage, you get both parents of the bride and groom and both parents of the deceased, if that information was given at the time of registration. So this is where you could maybe get names for your Irish relatives that no longer survive in Ireland. Because if somebody emigrated and moved to Scotland and died there, that additional information was requested at registration, and that would not have been requested if they had died in Northern Ireland. Again, this is a pay-per-view site, but you can search these indexes for free. So you would just click on that, and 6 credits is again, I think that's about £3 to view that record online. So that is the most of what I wanted to show you on genealogy. But I just wanted to mention one more thing to you. And of course, any of you who know me would know that I cannot do a presentation without mentioning DNA at some point. So I'm just going to finish with a brief mention of DNA. And what I'm going to show you is Y and mitochondrial DNA. If you haven't done a Y or mitochondrial DNA, you could be missing out. And what I would recommend is that you all consider doing a Y test, which does your father's line, or a mitochondrial test, and it does your mother's line. Now, these test kits can be sourced through our society, and we can quite often provide discounts that may not be available when you're purchasing through the Family Tree DNA website. And again, Family Tree DNA is the only company that provides Y and mitochondrial testing. So do consider that, because it may help you to break through your brick walls. And we have been looking today at how to advance your genealogy. And we want your genealogy to line up with what you find on your DNA. So DNA is a very important piece of the jigsaw as well. So thank you for listening to me. I hope you found something of use in this talk tonight, and thank you for attending.